The road stretched into nothingness, a thin strip of asphalt cutting through an endless sea of black. Jake and Emma drove in silence, their headlights carving faint paths through the oppressive dark. The air in the car was heavy, dense with the kind of quiet tension that felt like it might swallow them whole. Then the car sputtered. It was faint at first, a hiccup in the engine. Jake frowned, tapping the gas pedal. The sputtering grew louder, angrier, until the engine let out a guttural groan and died completely. The silence that followed was deafening. Jake cursed under his breath and tried the ignition again. Nothing. Emma glanced at her phone, the faint glow illuminating her frown. "No signal," she said, her voice trembling. They were stranded, alone. The darkness pressed against the windows, thick and impenetrable. Beyond the road, only trees loomed, their shadows twisting in the wind like skeletal fingers. And then Jake saw it. A flicker of light ahead. A neon sign blinking erratically through the trees. "Motel," he read aloud. Relief tinged his voice, but Emma didn't share his optimism. The sign grew clearer as they approached, revealing a decrepit building that sagged under its own weight. The paint was peeling in long, jagged strips, the windows gaping like empty eye sockets. The air smelled faintly of rot and damp earth. They pulled into the parking lot, gravel crunching under the tires. Emma peered out the window, her heart sinking. There were no other cars, no sign of life. The flickering neon sign buzzed like an angry insect, the word vacancy glaring down at them. "This feels wrong," Emma whispered. "What other choice do we have?" Jake said, gripping the door handle. "The car's dead and no mechanic is going to show up until morning. We need to sleep somewhere." Emma hesitated, her unease gnawing at her. But Jake was already out of the car, grabbing their bags. Inside, the front desk was worse than the outside. Dimly lit, reeking of mildew. The wallpaper was yellowed and peeling, revealing patches of damp, crumbling plaster beneath. A single light bulb hung overhead, its faint buzzing the only sound in the stifling silence. The bell on the counter was tarnished, its once polished surface now dull and pitted. Jake pressed it, the sharp clang echoing unnervingly through the empty lobby. They waited, the seconds stretching into an eternity. "There's no one here," Emma murmured, her voice hushed as if she feared being overheard. The emptiness pressed down on them. The parking lot had been deserted. The building itself seemed devoid of life, and yet the smell of mildew and stale air suggested someone had been here. Emma's skin crawled. Then he appeared. The old man emerged from a doorway behind the desk, his movements stiff and deliberate. His hollow eyes didn't quite seem to focus, and his smile was a thin, unnatural line stretched too far across his face. Emma suppressed a shiver. "Room 6, he rasped, sliding a rusted key across the counter. His fingers trembled as he pointed down the hall. "Everything else is occupied, the only room left." Emma's brow furrowed. Occupied. There hadn't been a single car outside. Her stomach twisted, but Jake grabbed the key, muttering his thanks. The hallway was dim and narrow, the walls lined with cracked wood paneling. Faint sounds echoed in the distance. A soft creak here, a low groan there, but no voices, no signs of other guests. Emma clung to Jake's arm, her unease growing with every step. The door to room 6 was at the very end, the furthest corner of the building. Jake unlocked it, the old key scraping loudly in the lock. The door groaned as it swung open, revealing the room inside. The air wrapped around them like a suffocating blanket, heavy with the stink of mildew and something worse, a cloying metallic tang that made Emma gag. The flickering light bulb overhead buzzed faintly, casting broken shards of light across the room. The carpet was a patchwork of stains, some so dark and vivid that Emma felt her stomach churn. Jake dropped his bag onto the bed, its sagging frame groaning in protest. He froze, his eyes darting to Emma. He wouldn't say it, but she could see it on his face. He felt it too, that wrongness. Emma's eyes were drawn to the closet door, slightly ajar, a sliver of pitch-black darkness visible through the crack. The air seemed colder near it, like an unseen draft was seeping from the void. "This place," she muttered, her voice barely a whisper. "It feels..." "Don't," Jake cut her off sharply. "It's just a room. We'll get some sleep. Call a mechanic in the morning and leave." The flickering light cast long shadows that seemed to move in ways the two of them didn't. Emma's gaze kept drifting back to the closet, its door slightly ajar, and the strange, suffocating cold that seemed to radiate from it. At 2 a.m., the scratching started. It came from under the bed, faint at first, like nails dragging slowly against wood. Emma froze, her body rigid with fear. Jake, his face pale and glistening with sweat, grabbed his phone and bent down, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The light revealed nothing, just the grimy floor beneath the bed. But when Jake sat back up, the mirror had changed. Their reflections weren't right. In the glass, they sat motionless, their faces blank, their eyes wide and unblinking. They weren't moving, not even breathing. And then Emma saw it. Behind their reflected selves, the old man's face loomed, his hollow eyes burning with malice, his too wide grin stretching impossibly far. She screamed. Jake spun around, but the room was empty. The mirror shattered with a deafening crack, and the room went pitch black. Panicked, they grabbed their bags and fled. Jake fumbled the car, the engine refusing to turn over. His hands trembled as he yanked at wires, muttering curses under his breath. Emma stood by, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes darting nervously back toward the motel. "Hurry," she urged, her voice shaking. Finally, the engine roared to life with a sputter. Jake slammed the door, and they sped down the road, gravel spraying behind them. The glow of the flickering neon sign faded quickly into the night. Emma clutched the door handle, her knuckles white. The silence in the car was deafening, broken only by the sound of their shallow, panicked breaths. She didn't dare look back again, but Jake's hands trembled on the wheel. He kept his eyes locked on the road, speeding faster than he ever had before. Miles away, Emma dared to glance at the mirror. Her stomach dropped. The old man's face stared back at her, his hollow eyes burning with malice, his grin stretching impossibly far. Jack's voice faltered as he noticed her frozen expression. "What's wrong?" But she couldn't speak, couldn't scream. No one ever found their car. No one ever heard their screams. But sometimes, on a moonless night, travelers say they see flickering lights in the trees and hear faint, desperate whispers carried by the wind. The motel remains, waiting for its next guests.